Well, the horror game you've been waiting for is finally here, Blair Witch. First-person horror experience developed by the masters of first-person horror walking simulators Bloober Team. Inspired by the cinematic lore of Blair Witch, experience a new story-driven psychological horror game that studies your reactions to fear and stress. Well, I guess that's one way to describe it, but to me, this is a game about a guy just stuck in the forest with his service dog, seeing a bunch of weird and spooky things that might occasionally resemble horror. Before the final 30 minutes of the game, where you walk around the same looking derelict house while loud noises occur and you're presented with an ending that you feel like you had no control over. Scary indeed. But the scariest thing is that old late 90s mobile phone. And you can even play Snake on it or prank call the pizza place like we did back in high school.
This is Donnie's Pizza, and if you don't order this time, I swear I'm gonna fight you and shove a pizza up your ass!
Anyway, Blair Witch takes place in 1996 after the events in the first film, The Blair Witch Project. Taking place in the same forest in Burkittsville, Maryland, you're playing as a former police officer named Ellis, who appears to be having some issues with his partner Jess back home and some tension with the local sheriff over a cock-up that he made back when he was a cop. Ellis takes it upon himself to go into the forest and help his old colleagues look for a missing kid named Peter. Yeah, Peter. It was either going to be that, Timmy, or Billy. He's also been assigned a new partner, a cute little German Shepherd service dog named Bullet. Oh, look at him.
Just take the damn dog, Ellis.
And Bullet is about the only thing keeping Ellis from descending down a much darker and self-destructive path, and I'm not talking about watching anime.
Schwacked.
Early on in the game, we see what happens when Ellis is separated from Bullet for too long, which basically results in him just freaking the hell out and having a nervous breakdown.
Bullet?
Same thing that happens when you watch anime. I think the idea here was that you had to make sure Bullet was by your side during the game, or else you might have some kind of freak out and it would be a game over. But he's always healing so close to Ellis anyway that he may as well be surgically attached, and the only time you're really separated is when it's scripted that way.
No, not now.
Aside from that, we also learn that Ellis has got some pretty serious PTSD over another bit of drama that happened when he was in the army, with some kind of incident occurring when he was in some generic looking Middle East location. So my dude's got a tarnished military record, then he's gone and done some stupid shit when he was a cop, both of which resulting in the loss of lives. So of course, what a fantastic idea to go off into the forest by himself, with no supplies when it's close to dark, looking for a missing boy in a forest notorious for people vanishing. That just also happens to be the epicenter for the folklore of an evil witch. I do kind of respect it for that, though, dealing with a really dark but relevant issue like depression and suicide, which is something that has recently become a pretty huge problem for young men particularly. But when the basis of the story lacks any concept of basic common sense, it's not getting things off to a good start. It's not too far removed from the ditzy teenager who heads off into the basement in the slasher movie when she hears a funny noise. Blair Witch does start off pretty tame. You're moving through the forest during the day, and all things considered, it's quite pretty and serene. Then it gets dark and the forest becomes a bit of a maze. Your vision drops down to a few feet in front of you, and you really start to feel like some poor asshole that's really getting out of his depth. At times you can feel like you're just walking around in circles. In fact, if you wander off aimlessly, you're likely to just end up back where you started. Kind of mirroring the first film, how the crew ended up back at the same area after walking for days. Luckily though, your trusty service dog is here to help.
Go on, see if you can find something else.
Bullet's more than just a pretty face. He'll often bark to let you know if there's anything of interest nearby, and at times you can even send him off into areas you can't reach to bring back important items.
Good dog.
It's probably about 30 or so minutes into the game though when things start to become a bit bizarre, and the game then starts to take on its more horror-based approach. Even then though, I'd often be hard-pressed to call this game scary. I mean look, when it comes to horror, I am an absolute pussy, and anyone who's seen any of my videos I've done on horror games can attest to that. Go watch my Lost in Vivo review to see me bitching out firsthand. Ah! What the fuck? But the thing is, I just never really found Blair Witch to be consistently scary, outside of a couple of key moments. I never had that moment when I screamed so loud that my girlfriend came into the room to see what I was screaming at, or that moment where I jumped up in fright and knocked the mouse off my table. The amount of jump scares in the game can be counted on one hand, which is a good thing, because it means when they do happen, they get you a lot better, because they're so few and far between. But once you realize that 90% of the time there's nothing around that's going to actually kill you, the tension and the suspense is completely evaporated. As a result, most of the time it's just walking around this spooky looking forest. This might get mislabeled as a walking simulator, and yeah, you are going to be doing a fair bit of walking around. The last 30 or so minutes of the game is just pressing W and turning left or right occasionally. But there are times when you have to search for clues and find key items, then backtrack to previous areas. At one point you're on a rail car moving back and forth between multiple locations as you repair some kind of machine. And a lot of the time I found myself more focused on what I was supposed to be doing next, like finding the combination for a locked door, or remembering where I was supposed to bring a fuse back to, instead of finding myself getting caught up in all the atmosphere. If you've seen the films, you'll know that the whole found footage thing was a pretty big aspect to the way those stories were told. And in the game, you've got your own shitty camcorder which becomes used for pretty much all of the puzzles in the game. Now I say puzzles in quotations. The way this works is that you find these tapes that have filmed some kind of event somewhere close to your current location. And viewing these tapes and stopping them at specific moments is then going to change the environment in real time. So in the tape, if a locked door is open but closed in the real world, pausing it at the right time in the tape will open it in the real world, and then you can walk through it, right? It's not really explained all that well the first time it happens though, where I got stuck for like 15 minutes before I figured out what I was supposed to do. And even then, it was by accident. Once you figure out how this works, you basically know the solution for it every single other time, so it's really just like you're doing the same thing over and over. The few moments that could be described as combat, where you have something trying to attack you, are really simple and not all that threatening. Every now and then these weird monster things are going to surround you and charge towards you, so you got to use your flashlight to shine a light on them, which weakens and eventually kills them, like in Alan Wake. Another game that's about running around forests at nighttime. Bullet's going to face in the direction these things are coming, so it's as simple as just watching him and facing the same way that he does. These also happen at specific moments in the campaign, so you're never having to avoid enemies in a standard sense. I mean, there's not going to be zombies or tree monsters running around that you actively have to watch out for. It's all just scripted. I will say though that I do appreciate that this isn't another one of those games where I have to run around completely defenseless all the time, avoiding that one super tough enemy that's going to grab me and kill me in a single hit. Or being unable to fight back against inbred redneck pond scum that looks so weak and feeble that I could probably cough in their direction and keel over. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Outlast, when I say that, you overrated, ugly piece of shit. Visually, Blair Witch does a pretty good job with its environments. The whole thing runs on the Unreal 4 engine, which is no surprise. I mean, it was either going to be that or the Unity engine. And it does its best to mix things up a bit, considering you're really just running around the same looking forest for an entire game. Even something as simple as just moving through the forest at day or nighttime with only your flashlight and bullet to lead the way makes for some eerie and unsettling imagery. And those few moments when you're using the camera's monitor to see the way forward can also be really spooky. Some of the lighting effects look gorgeous and highly realistic, and I think there's some great gore and violence those few times you get to see it. I mean, I don't want brain dead levels of gore, but a little bit more would have been good. I mean, it is a horror game. And I do have to say that the atmosphere at times can be incredible. There's some really well crafted areas that just look stunning. There's only a couple of other character models in the game, and they all look highly detailed, along with Bullet too, and that cute little face. Aw, look at him.
Aren't you a handsome boy?
The thing is, it kinda runs like rubbish. I had really bad performance even with a GTX 2070, with the game chugging along and stuttering like hell. Even the pre-rendered cinematics were really sluggish for some reason too, probably because these cinematics were also hiding loading screens. And supposedly they even brought out a patch to fix this, but I shudder to think what it was like beforehand, because it sure ain't good now. I even had a few game-breaking bugs and I had to reload a save file from the main menu to proceed. One time I got stuck in a tree, and a couple of others the game hardlocked and I couldn't exit an animation. Bugs are bad, but bugs in horror games are even worse. Horror games are all about immersion. The longer you can get drawn into that world, the more frightening and scary it becomes. But if you get snapped out of that world by a car door not opening properly or clipping through a tree branch, well, it's like someone's just hit the reset button and you're back to square one. You suddenly remember it's a Sunday afternoon and you're sitting alone at your computer playing a horror game in your underwear. All up, I didn't find Blair Witch to be all that amazing. It never escalated to the point of being truly frightening despite advertising itself as a horror game, and the puzzle side of things was basic at best. I do think the mechanic of the service dog is pretty cool though, and at least it's something that hasn't really been done all that much before. The only other game I can think of that had a similar concept was Lost in Vivo. That one was about a guy losing his dog down the sewer, and then you went off into Nightmare Land to get it back. Oh! Fuck! But Bullet plays a much more central part to the gameplay here, with him being a lot more prominent, so it kind of stands out on its own.
Aren't you a handsome boy?
And that's kind of the problem. The story seems to focus more on Ellis and Bullet and his own personal demons than the actual demon it's supposed to be focusing on, the Blair Witch. There's a few Blair Witchy things speckled here and there, but all of the spooky stuff you come across pertains more to Ellis's personal history. His hallucinations and visions often involve more of his own past tragedies than they do of the ones befalling the kid he's supposed to be finding. And then the ending, where you'd hope to see everything wrapped up, is so abrupt and sudden that it completely caught me off guard.
Sorry, wrong number.
If the ending had been a single sentence that just said, "You lose, game over," it honestly would have had the same effect. The whole thing took me about 4 hours to get through. Now, I'm told that I do finish games really quickly, but I can't imagine this thing taking anyone longer than 5 or 6 hours to finish, unless you really spend all that much time going off and looking for every hidden item. If it takes you longer than 7 or 8 hours for a first time playthrough though, I have to assume you're the kind of person who likes to eat glue and sniff cow farts in your spare time.
You got a point there.
Bloober Team have always been a bit hit and miss for me. I really liked Laser Fear 1, I hated Observer, and I never played Laser Fear 2. So it makes sense that Blair Witch should fit somewhere in between. It's not amazing, but it's also not bad, it's just okay. It's definitely polished in some aspects, like I think most of the presentation is really good. The sound design is decent enough, and it does have some good voice acting and writing. Some of the weird stuff you'll see when Ellis has finally lost his marbles is really creative and almost artistic. There's fascinating visual effects and environments that shift and change before your eyes almost seamlessly. Bloober Team have always at least managed to make sure that those heavily scripted moments are visually interesting. And you've got to give credit to the artistry and talent that's gone into bringing some of those visions to life. Apparently, it even has 5 different endings, which are based on the way you treat Bullet and Jess, and also a few other things along the way too, but that's not really enough reason for me to want to replay the whole thing. When I finished it, I got the bad ending, which I don't really get, because I thought I took something of a pacifist route with my playthrough. But that's just one of the many mysteries that Blair Witch presents to the player, along with its central plot of a boy being kidnapped that ultimately has no real resolution or catharsis, but maybe that's the whole point. And I think that's the reception Blair Witch is gonna get. Some people are gonna love it, and some people are just gonna forget about it, if they even know it exists in the first place, because this game has been marketed horribly. I'm just wondering why they released it a couple of months before Halloween, when they could have just spent some more time polishing things up and making sure it was bug-free and optimized, ready for a mid to late October release, at a time when people would probably lap it all up and throw their money at it. In Australia, it's currently $40, which for a 4 or so hour game means you're looking at about $10 an hour. If you're going to replay it to see all the other endings, well, bully for you. But I just don't think at that price point it's worth your hard-earned dollary dues. Still, if you are a fan of horror and cute German shepherds with some Blair Witch lore thrown on the top, well, this is the game for you. And if nothing else, we can all agree that Bullet is still pretty damn cute.